A few years ago, I was in a coffee shop and I was reading a newspaper. It's not a newspaper I normally read. And there was an article in there that caught my eye, and it was called "The Three Big Lies That Gangs Tell." And I started reading the article and went through it, and thought, well, this is interesting what this person's saying. It's not that I disagreed with a lot of it. There's something about it that bugged me. And so, but it wasn't a newspaper, and I am skeptical about how newspapers report on things. And so, a couple of years later, I had an opportunity to actually see the person who was the feature of this article. He was a gang expert from Texas. And he had been doing a speaking tour, and he was talking to police officers and teachers and so on. And he ended up doing school presentations, and it turned out that he was doing a presentation at my daughter's school. And so I took advantage of that, went to the presentation to see if, what the newspaper had reported about his approach, or what his strategy for dealing with gang recruitment was actually being reflected accurately. And it was. So I feel confident about reporting on that report. Anyway, this man said that there are three big lies that gangs use to recruit young people into the gangs. The first lie is that gangs offer protection. He started off by saying to the kids, what would you do if you were having a fight? And so he brings two kids up, and he says, you're having a fight, you disagree with each other, and Susie, what are you going to do to make yourself feel safer? And Susie says, well, I want to have some friends around me because I feel safe. So she brings some kids up from the gym, and they stand beside her, and then he turns to the boy and says, well, Johnny, well, how do you feel? Well, I feel kind of outnumbered here, so I don't feel that safe at all. So what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to get some more of my friends. But then he calls up even more friends than what the other girl has. And the police officer used that as an opportunity to show the kids how this could just go on and on forever. Now she has to get more friends to outnumber his friends and so on. And he says, and when there's a whole group of kids at the front, he says, now how are you going to protect each other all the time? Like, you all go home and you have different lives and so on. And so his argument is that gangs, the first big lie is that gangs offer you protection. But the fact is, it's mathematically impossible to protect everybody in the gang. That what the gangs in fact offer is retaliation, not protection. And that's a different thing. Retaliation after the fact. If you hurt one of my brothers or one of my members of the gang, we're going to get you. So then he goes on to the second lie that gangs tell. And he says to the kids in the gym, if you're in a mall shopping with your parents and the police come and they arrest you, would your parents run off in all four directions? And the kids laugh and they say no. And he says, well, of course not, because the family stays together. And if somebody's in trouble, then, the family will pay to get a lawyer, visit you in jail, do whatever is necessary to help you get through this thing. But that's not what gangs do. Gangs say that they're like a family, but if you're in a gang, they take off and continue to party. You're expected to keep your mouth shut, and they don't support you at all. So the second big lie is that gangs are like family, but they're not. The third big lie that he went to was this notion that fear is respect. And what he said in the article was, kids, if they have this misguided notion that fear is respect, and that dissing is disrespect, and that's what dissing means, disrespect. So say a couple of people get into a verbal fight. If you want to one-up the other person, then it moves to, say, a fist fight, and that escalates maybe to a knife fight, to a gunfight, and so on, because there's no way to get out of that escalating kind of fight when you believe that fear is respect. If the person is not showing a certain amount of fear towards you, they're not respecting you. And so to escalate that fear factor, you have to escalate the violence factor. And so that was the three big lies that gangs tell. Well, when I first read it, I thought, well, it's kind of hard to argue against a lot of this stuff because it does make sense. But there was something about it that bugged me, and it was a bit familiar. And then I think it was probably a day or two later that it dawned on me what it was about this three big lies that gangs tell that was bothering me. Is that the three things he talked about were things that we did and that our system did. The first one, that gangs offer protection, is really the first big lie of the criminal justice system, that the criminal justice system will offer you protection. This gang expert says, but in the context of gangs, that's not really protection, it's retaliation after the fact. Well, if you think about criminal justice, that's exactly what it is, because criminal justice systems are not mandated to intervene in people's lives until the conflict or the crime has already happened. And so everything that happens from that point is actually in retaliation after the fact. It's not prevention. So we could say that that's the first big lie of criminal justice. And the second big lie, that gangs are like family, to me seems like the lie of the social contract, that everybody's important to the whole. The beginning of the seeds of democracy, we're all important and we're all making our contributions and we're all part of this big whole, and the whole depends on the individuals. But in today's society, kids realize as soon as they go to school that there are some kids that are disposable, that they will be kicked out of class, they'll be sidelined, made to stay for detention, so on and so forth, and that they will be isolated, and they won't necessarily be made to feel like they're part of the family. The third big lie that fears respect, to me, is the whole premise of the criminal justice system and the whole notion of laws and punishments. That you will respect the law if the punishment is really harsh. So you will fear the punishment and then you will respect the law. So the paradox here is that the gangs, the pathology of gangs, if you will, that were highlighted by this gang expert are actually a mirror reflection of us in our own system, and that we're never going to be able to change what happens with gang recruitments until we change ourselves and change what we do with our young people and ourselves.